Joining us now, Democratic Congressman Joaquin Castro of Texas. He's a member of the House Intelligence Committee. Congressman, thanks very much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So you heard Comey say that as part of his conversation with the president asked him to, I hope you can let this go, referring to the fired National Security Advisor Michael Flynn. He saw that as direction. He used the word direction from the president. Are you ready to say it's obstruction of justice?
Well, that's a great question, and it certainly furthers that narrative. I do think that we need to wait to let the special counsel do his work. He's just started that. But it's hard to imagine that if you're James Comey and you're in a one-on-one meeting at the White House with the president, which is very rare, which he said, and he says, I hope this is what happens with this investigation, that you don't take that as either directive or pressure of some sort.
What would the bar be to go forward with an obstruction of justice charge? How high is that bar?
Well, I think there's basically two investigations that need to go on here, and really are going on, I think. Number one is the substantive issue of collusion, whether any Americans colluded with the Russians who interfered with our 2016 elections. And then the second part is now this obstruction of justice issue. And of course, that's a legal issue. And so the special counsel is going to have to make that determination and ultimately, give us some sense of whether it meets that legal definition.
You've told me in the past, you believe when all is said and done, some people will probably go to jail. You still believe that?
Sure, I gave a frank assessment. I gave my impression, but I also think that it's important that we go through the process. Some of my colleagues have said that they think we should move forward on impeachment. Every day on social media, many Democratic members, and I'm sure Republican members, are hearing from the American public that is pushing for impeachment, some people getting very anxious. But the point I would make is this. First of all, the process has to be fair, it has to be thorough, and because of the makeup of the Congress and what you see now with many Republicans in Congress really digging in and really doing acrobatics to defend the president, if you're going to go down that road, you have to make sure that all of your ducks are in a row, and I just don't think we're there yet. Yes, the evidence seems very damning. What we heard is very damning, but we have to make sure that we compile all of the pieces of evidence that we possibly can.
But without mentioning any names, because I know you don't want to, potentially who would wind up in jail? What kind of individuals?
That was just my impression. Again, I can't be specific about why or what, but if you ask me my impression, having seen everything that I've seen, both public and otherwise, that's certainly my impression.
Trump campaign associates. People associated with the Trump campaign, that's what you're talking about, right?
Sure. I mean, I'd rather not specify, but I think it's important that we let this thing play itself out, and then the public will see for itself.
So the former FBI Director Comey, he accused the president today and his administration of lying on multiple occasions, not just once or twice. That's why he said he wrote those contemporaneous memos detailing the conversations he had with the president.
And that by itself, Wolf, is remarkable, that an FBI director would say that about a sitting American president.
And the sitting American president's private outside attorney, Mark Kassovitz, came out afterwards, had a little statement that he read over at the National Press Club, in which he said Comey is a liar on both the Michael Flynn let it go issue and on the loyalty issue. He said Comey is lying, that it's not true. Now, Comey was testifying under oath. If you lie under oath before Congress, that's a crime. That's perjury.
Charge,
you could potentially go to jail. So, it's a he said versus he said. How are you going to find out who's telling the truth?
Well, a few things. First, you're right. There was only one person who was speaking under oath, and that was James Comey, and he gave his testimony. The second thing is, I would ask the president to produce the tapes of those conversations, if they in fact exist.
Do you think they do exist?
I don't know. He's the only one that can answer that. But I also think that the committees should send over a subpoena to the White House for those tapes, and they should be produced if they exist. Secondly, I think instead of a spokesperson, the next time the president gives a public address, hopefully this week, he should address this issue directly to the American people, because, as was brought up in this testimony, it is a very big deal.
Well, he's got a private attorney now who's going to speak for him on these matters, although we did hear from the Deputy White House Press Secretary, Sarah Huckabee Sanders. She said today the president is not a liar.
And I'll be honest with you, Wolf, the American people don't want to hear from a spokesperson. They don't want to hear from Sarah Huckabee. They want to hear from the American president about all of this, and he should speak to it.
The FBI director did say, Lordy, I hope there are tapes. your committee, the Intelligence Committee, you could subpoena tapes if they exist, but the Republican leadership has to go along with that. Is there that kind of a demand among your Republican leadership in the committee to seek those tapes if, in fact, they exist?
I've got to be honest, I haven't had conversations with them about that, and so I don't want to speak for them. But I will say that it's something we should be able to agree on, a bipartisan basis, that we ought to subpoena those tapes. I said early on, we ought to give the White House a chance to turn them over if they exist. At this point, they've not turned anything over, but have also not confirmed that they exist or do not exist. And so we ought to subpoena them.
Very quickly, on the Loretta Lynch issue that came up today during the testimony, Comey was clearly irritated at the former Attorney General during the Obama administration because at one point he was talking about his investigation of Hillary Clinton and the email server, the private email server that she was using. And she said, don't use the word investigation, use the word matter. And he said he was deeply disturbed by that. You understand why that would anger him?
Sure. I mean, I think most people would call it an investigation. I do think that it's a matter of semantics. And it also, the Clinton email issue and story is something that was covered over and over and over during the election. It's something that was basically investigated by the Congress or touched upon. And so we've got a much more serious issue in front of us. Obstruction of justice and whether that occurred, and secondly, whether anybody colluded with the Russians.
We're just getting word that the House investigators have now received what are being described as a batch of documents from former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn 1 week after issuing the subpoenas. I'll quote Adam Schiff, the ranking Democrat on your committee. We're going through the documents we've received from various witnesses, including General Flynn, to determine if they meet the requirements of the documents we've asked for. I think we're still engaged in that review. Have you personally seen those documents?
I have not. I look forward to seeing them. I'm glad that Michael Flynn has turned them over. I hope that other witnesses will do the same, and that in due course he'll come in front of the committee, and that the other witnesses that we've identified will come over also.
Was it appropriate for Comey to hand over his memorandums on his conversations with the president to a friend of his, a professor at Columbia University Law School, and say, give these to a reporter? And in fact, they were leaked to the New York Times. Was that appropriate for private conversations between him and the president to be distributed that way?
Well, I'm not the final arbiter of that or anybody else on the committee, the legislative committee, but from what I could tell, those were not classified documents. Which
Comey said they were not classified.
Right.
The lawyer for the president said they were privileged communications.
Well, I'll let the lawyers in the Justice Department settle that issue, but I don't see it as being something that was completely out of left field.
Yeah, Comey said he did that because he wanted to put some pressure to get a special counsel involved.
Absolutely.
And there is now a special counsel, Robert Mueller, a former FBI director. Congressman